When the gates of the Galactic Empire finally opened to humanity, every civilization in the known universe held its breath, waiting for the inevitable chaos. But what they witnessed instead would shake the foundations of a 1,000-year-old society far more than any war ever could. The Ventari Council chambers had never been so silent. 300 representatives from across 70 star systems sat motionless, their various appendages frozen mid-gesture, their breathing apparatuses cycling air in perfect, anxious synchrony. On the central holographic display, a human vessel drifted toward the checkpoint like a piece of forgotten debris. Its hull scratched and dented, its engines humming with a sound that registered somewhere between boredom and complete disinterest. Ambassador Krelthor had prepared for this moment for 6 rotations. His species, the Xanthari, had been the first to encounter humanity during the border skirmishes of the Outer Rim. They had warned the Council. They had shown the footage. The humans in combat were terrifying, yes, but manageable. What made them truly dangerous, Krelthor had insisted, was something else entirely. Something the Empire had never faced before. The transmission crackled to life. A human appeared on screen, slouched in what passed for a captain's chair, eyes half-lidded, expression utterly flat. She was chewing something. The Council would later learn it was called gum. "Yeah, this is the UNSC Perseverance," the human said, her voice carrying all the enthusiasm of someone reading ingredients off a food packet. "We're here for the integration thing. Do we just park somewhere or—" Admiral Vex Aris of the Kronar Ascendancy felt his blood chill. This was it. The legendary human unpredictability. They were playing psychological games, lulling the Council into complacency before striking. He'd read the reports. Humans were chaos incarnate, their military strategies incomprehensible, their violence sudden and absolute. This display of casual disinterest was clearly a tactic. "Captain," Vexaris responded, his voice resonating with the authority of 10,000 successful campaigns. "You stand before the assembled powers of the Galactic Empire. 300 worlds, fleets that could glass a continent with a thought. Perhaps you would show the appropriate respect." The human blinked slowly, twice, like a predator calculating, like a warrior preparing. "Right," she said. "Cool. So, Bay 14? That was the first crack. The integration ceremony had been planned with exquisite detail. The Empire's finest architects had designed a welcome that would inspire awe, that would make these upstart humans understand their place in the grand cosmic hierarchy. Crystalline towers that sang with the light of distant stars. Gardens cultivated from the rarest flora of 100 worlds. A processional path lined with honor guards from every major civilization, their weapons gleaming, their armor polished to mirror brightness. The first human delegation arrived 3 hours late. When questioned, their leader, a man named Ambassador Chen, who wore his formal attire like it was a punishment, simply said, "Traffic was crazy. Also, we couldn't find parking. Your signage is terrible." The Keltari Hierophant, whose species had spent centuries perfecting the art of ceremony, felt something inside him wither. "There is no traffic in controlled approach vectors, and we transmitted navigational data directly to your ship's core systems." Chen shrugged. "Yeah, Jenkins was supposed to download that. He was busy, though. Fantasy football draft." "What?" the Hierophant whispered. "Is fantasy football?" That was the second crack. Over the next weeks, the Council attempted every traditional method of integration. They invited humanity to military exercises, expecting to see the legendary combat prowess that had made them such a concern during first contact. The human representatives arrived with coffee thermoses and complained about the early start time. When the Kronar shock troops demonstrated their assault formations, a maneuver that had conquered 47 worlds, one human yawned and said, "Yeah, we saw this in a movie once. The aliens lost. They They invited humanity to cultural exchanges, grand displays of art and philosophy that represented 10,000 years of civilization. The humans took pictures, nodded politely, and one was caught playing a game on a handheld device during a sacred Ventari meditation ritual. When confronted, she looked up and said, "Sorry, I was almost at the next level. You guys were being quiet, so I figured it was fine." They invited humanity to witness the glory of the Empire, a massive fleet exercise where 10,000 ships moved in perfect synchronization, a display that had brought previous species to tears of reverence. The human observers watched for 20 minutes, then started a conversation about something called lunch options, and whether the station had anything good, or if they needed to just hit the vending machines again. But the true breaking point came during the Grand Tribunal. Every species that joined the Empire was required to face the Tribunal, an assembly of the Empire's oldest and most powerful beings. Entities that had witnessed the birth of stars, consciousnesses that existed across multiple dimensions. The Tribunal's judgment was absolute, their wisdom unquestionable, their presence enough to make even the most prideful species kneel. The humans were led into the chamber in chains of ceremonial light, an ancient tradition meant to symbolize the binding of chaos to order. The tribunal manifested before them in their full glory, reality itself bending around their forms, the very air singing with power that could unmake worlds. Ambassador Chen looked up at them, squinted slightly and said, "Is this going to take long? I've got a thing at 3. The tribunal spoke in unified voices that shook the foundations of the chamber. "You stand before the eternal judgment, we who have seen the rise and fall of galaxies, we who hold the fate of civilizations in our grasp. What have you to say, humanity?" Chen glanced at his watch, a device so primitive it required mechanical movement. "Can we do the short version? I've really got that thing." And then something unprecedented happened, something that would be analyzed by xenopsychologists for generations, something that would fundamentally alter the Empire's understanding of power itself. The tribunal hesitated. In that moment of silence, in that single heartbeat of confusion, every representative in the chamber felt the same impossible realization. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't intimidated. They weren't playing a game or hiding their fear behind bravado. They were simply, genuinely, profoundly bored. And somehow, impossibly, their complete lack of interest in the Empire's grandeur was more destabilizing than any weapon, more threatening than any fleet, more powerful than any show of force. Because for the first time in its 1,000-year history, the Galactic Empire had encountered something it had no protocol for. Something that no amount of military might or ancient wisdom could counter. They had encountered a species that looked upon their greatest achievements, their most sacred traditions, their most fearsome displays of power, and responded with a shrug and a request for better coffee. The tribunal dismissed the humans without judgment. The council adjourned without decision, and as Ambassador Chen and his delegation left to find that thing at 3, which turned out to be a sandwich shop someone had mentioned, Admiral Vex Aris sat alone in the empty chamber, staring at nothing, wondering if perhaps the humans had already won without ever raising a weapon at all. The next morning, the Empire's most brilliant minds gathered in emergency session. Not in the grand council chambers with their soaring architecture and symbolic grandeur, but in a small utilitarian conference room that the humans would have recognized immediately as the kind of space where real decisions get made. The kind with bad lighting and chairs that squeaked. Dr. Yiltara, the Empire's leading xenopsychologist, stood before a holographic display that showed frame-by-frame analysis of every human interaction since first contact. Her 4 eyes moved independently, each tracking different data streams, while her colleagues watched in various states of distress. She had spent 43 hours without rest, trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense according to every model, every theory, every precedent in galactic history. They have no hierarchy, she said, her voice hoarse. Or rather, they do, but they don't respect it. Ambassador Chen is technically their highest-ranking official present, yet I watched a junior technician interrupt him 17 times yesterday to show him what she called a really funny video. He watched it. He laughed. He showed it to 2 other officials. The meeting we had scheduled was delayed by 12 minutes. Commander Zethral of Imperial Security leaned forward, his crystalline features catching the light. Perhaps this is a tactic. A way to make us lower our defenses. For what purpose? Yiltara's voice cracked slightly. They haven't attempted to access any restricted areas. They haven't asked about our military capabilities or strategic resources. Yesterday, one of them spent 3 hours trying to fix a food dispenser in their quarters because, and I quote, "the coffee it makes tastes like sadness." When I offered to have our engineers address it, she said, "Nah, I'm almost done. This is kind of fun, actually." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the spires of the imperial capital stretched toward the stars, monuments to power and permanence. Inside, the foundations of certainty were quietly crumbling. "What do they want?" someone whispered. Yiltara pulled up another file, security footage from the human quarters. "Watch this." The video showed 5 humans gathered in what they'd converted into a communal space. They'd moved furniture around, despite regulations. They'd hung pieces of fabric on the walls, images of places from their homeworld. Oceans, mountains, a city at night. One human was cooking something on a device they'd cobbled together from spare parts. The smell had apparently caused 3 different species to file complaints about unidentified atmospheric contaminants. The humans called it pasta night. They were laughing, telling stories. One was showing pictures of something called a dog to another, who responded with pictures of her own dog. They argued playfully about which dog was objectively better, a debate that somehow lasted 45 minutes and resolved nothing. They didn't discuss strategy, they didn't plan or scheme. They simply existed together, comfortable in a way that the Empire's integrated species rarely achieved, even after decades of cohabitation. "They're lonely," Yiltara said quietly. "That's what I think. They're so far from home and they miss it. But instead of fear or ambition or any response we could understand, they just carry their home with them, make it wherever they are." Admiral Vex Aris, who had been silent until now, stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. They're a species, one species among hundreds. They don't get to disrupt millennia of protocol simply because they refuse to take things seriously." "And yet," Yiltara said, meeting his gaze, "they are." The turning point came during what should have been a routine diplomatic dinner. The Empire had prepared a feast showcasing delicacies from across known space. Foods that took years to prepare, dishes that cost more than some ships, culinary artworks that were themselves considered cultural treasures. The setting was immaculate, crystal architecture that seemed to defy gravity, lighting that shifted with the conversation's emotional tenor, music composed by an AI that had spent 3 centuries studying the mathematical nature of beauty. The humans arrived on time, which itself was noteworthy progress. They looked uncomfortable in their formal attire, kept pulling at collars and adjusting sleeves. Ambassador Chen actually complimented the venue, which sent a ripple of hope through the imperial hosts. Perhaps they were finally beginning to understand. Perhaps the weight of civilization was finally pressing down upon them. Then the food arrived. A Zenthari trade minister, eager to demonstrate his cultural knowledge, had researched human cuisine. He gestured proudly to a dish he'd had specially prepared. "We understand your species has an appreciation for what you call burgers. We've deconstructed the concept and elevated it using Venturan crystal prawns aged in the gravity wells of Colinth Fae, served on artisanal bread cultivated from wheat grown in pure antimatter-enriched soil." The human he'd addressed, a woman named Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, stared at the plate. The burger was a geometric impossibility, held together by what appeared to be force fields, glowing faintly with bioluminescence. It probably cost more than a small spacecraft. "This," she said slowly, "is the saddest thing I've ever seen." The Zenthari minister's translation implant must have malfunctioned. "I don't understand. We spared no expense. The preparation alone took—" "You took a burger," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a weight of genuine grief. "And you made it fancy. That's like turning a hug into a formal handshake. You've completely missed the point." Another human, a man named Marcus Webb, was staring at his own plate with similar dismay. "Is this supposed to be pizza?" "Indeed." The Keltari cultural attaché beamed with pride. "We analyzed thousands of your historical recipes. This represents the pinnacle of the form." "It's got gold leaf on it," Marcus said. "And are those jewels?" "Edible diamonds, yes. We thought—" "Pizza," Marcus said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a child, "costs like $8. You eat it from a box, probably while watching something dumb on TV. That's the whole point. It's not supposed to be expensive." The dinner dissolved after that, though not in anger. The humans ended up in the kitchen, much to the horror of the imperial chefs, showing them how to make actual food. They used simple ingredients, basic techniques, things that the Empire considered beneath notice. And somehow, impossibly, the food they created made the carefully prepared molecular gastronomy taste hollow by comparison. By the end of the night, 3 imperial dignitaries were sitting on the kitchen floor, eating something called grilled cheese, and listening to a human named James explain why his grandmother's recipe was objectively superior to all others, a claim that sparked immediate heated debate among the other humans. The ambassador from the Kelvar Protectorate, a species that communicated primarily through bioluminescent patterns, found herself laughing. Actually laughing. Something she hadn't done since her youth, before the weight of diplomacy had settled onto her shoulders. "You're all insane," she said, but there was no malice in it. "You've been offered the resources of an empire, and you're sitting on a kitchen floor arguing about sandwiches." Chen smiled. "Well, yeah, what else would we be doing?" And in that moment, something shifted. Because the question was genuine. To the humans, this was normal. This was how life should be lived. The grandeur, the ceremony, the weight of ancient civilizations. It was all just set dressing to the actual business of living. And the Empire, in all its 1,000-year glory, suddenly couldn't remember when it had last simply lived. The reports started coming in gradually. Human contamination spreading through imperial society like a strange, benign virus. A Kronar military installation reported that efficiency had decreased by 17% after a human technician introduced something called Casual Friday. When questioned, the commander admitted morale had increased by 43% and they'd had 0 disciplinary incidents in 3 weeks. He couldn't explain the connection. A Ventari research station found their scientists spending lunch breaks with human colleagues, not discussing theories or trading knowledge, but playing a card game called poker and talking about nothing consequential. Research output hadn't changed, but staff retention had reached unprecedented levels. Scientists who had requested transfers were withdrawing them. When asked why, they struggled to articulate it. They just felt better. Most disturbing was the report from the Imperial Archives. The humans had been given limited access to historical records as part of their integration. They'd spent 6 days reading about the Great Unification Wars, the philosophical movements that had shaped galactic society, the rise and fall of species and empires. The head archivist expected questions about strategy, about power structures, about the mechanisms of control. Instead, a human historian named Dr. Amelia Kowalski had looked up from her terminal with tears in her eyes and asked, "But were they happy? Any of them? It's all wars and treaties and technological advances. But did anyone ever just stop and appreciate a sunset? Did they love? Did they laugh? What was the point of building all this if no one enjoyed it? The archivist had no answer. The question had never occurred to them. That night, alone in his quarters, Admiral Vexaris did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He stood at his window looking out at the city, really looking at it, and wondered when he had stopped seeing the beauty, when duty had consumed everything else, when the weight of empire had crushed the simple joy of existence. His communicator chimed. A message from the human quarters, Ambassador Chen, asking if he wanted to join them for something called movie night. Completely inappropriate, a breach of protocol. The Admiral should report this casualness, this continued erosion of proper diplomatic distance. Instead, he found himself wondering what movie they would watch, and whether they had any more of that grilled cheese. Admiral Vexaris stood outside the human quarters for 7 minutes before pressing the door chime. 7 minutes of internal debate, of weighing protocols against curiosity, of feeling something uncomfortably close to nervousness. He had commanded fleets. He had negotiated with star-consuming entities. He had once stared down a void leviathan with nothing but a damaged cruiser and refused to blink. Yet here he stood, uncertain, before a simple door. The human who answered was wearing what they called sweatpants and a shirt with faded text that read, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." Her hair was tied back carelessly, and she held a bowl of something that smelled aggressively of artificial cheese. "Oh, hey." She smiled like they were old friends. "You're the Admiral guy, right? Come in, come in. We're just getting started. You like action movies or comedy?" "Actually, we're watching both. It's an action comedy. Die Hard. Classic." Vexaris stepped inside and felt his tactical assessment system struggle to process the scene. The quarters had been completely transformed. Furniture arranged in a circle facing a projection screen. Humans sprawled across every available surface in various states of comfortable disorder. The lighting was dim but warm. Someone had actually hung strings of small lights around the ceiling, creating a soft glow that served no functional purpose whatsoever. The air smelled like popcorn and that pasta sauce from before, and something else, something he couldn't identify. It took him a moment to realize it was the smell of contentment. Ambassador Chen waved from a couch, gesturing to an empty spot. "Grab some snacks from the table and have a seat. We're waiting for a couple more people." Apparently word got around. Indeed, 3 other non-humans were already present. A young Zenthari engineer Vexaris recognized from the research division, looking slightly mortified at being seen in such an informal setting. A Kelvar diplomatic aide who seemed fascinated by the bowl of multicolored candies in her hands. And, most surprisingly, Dr. Yiltara herself, curled into what passed for a comfortable position among the pillows someone had scattered on the floor, wearing an expression of anthropological intensity mixed with genuine relaxation. "This is a significant cultural observation opportunity," she said when she caught his eye. But her defensive tone suggested even she didn't quite believe her own justification. More beings arrived. A Kronar tactical officer, 2 Keltari scientists, even the Hierophant's personal assistant, who kept glancing at the door like he expected to be arrested for unauthorized fraternization. Within 20 minutes, the human quarters had become something unprecedented in Imperial history, a completely voluntary gathering of multiple species with no agenda, no protocol, no purpose beyond simply being together. The movie started. Vexaris had reviewed human entertainment before, always with an analytical eye toward understanding their strategic thinking, their cultural values, their approach to conflict. But watching it here, surrounded by the humans running commentary and laughter and gasped reactions, was entirely different. When the protagonist did something reckless, someone would shout, "That's so stupid!" but with affection, even admiration. When danger mounted, they'd yell warnings at the screen like the characters could hear them. They quoted lines before they happened, recited favorite moments in unison, groaned at bad jokes while simultaneously laughing. And slowly, Impossibly, others began joining in. The Zenthari engineer started asking questions. Why does he not call for tactical support? A human explained the concept of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, of having no choice but to rely on yourself. The engineer nodded slowly. We have regulations to prevent such scenarios. The human grinned. Yeah, but then you don't get the cool explosions. They both laughed, and the engineer looked surprised at himself for doing so. Halfway through, during a quiet moment in the film, Dr. Rodriguez paused the projection. Okay, real talk time. Bathroom break, snack refill, and I want to know, what do you guys do for fun? Like, actually fun, not ceremonial duty fun. The question hung in the air like a foreign language. The non-humans looked at each other with varying degrees of confusion. The Keltari scientist spoke first, slowly. We have recreational activities, meditation chambers, intellectual salons, cultural appreciation periods. Right, but do you enjoy them? Marcus asked. Like, do you finish and think, man, that was awesome, I can't wait to do that again? Silence. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, the Kronar officer spoke, his voice rough. We have duties, responsibilities. The Empire requires. The Empire can wait for 2 hours, Chen said quietly. What do you want to do? The question seemed to physically pain them. Vexaris watched as each non-human struggled with a concept that should have been simple. When had want become separate from duty? When had personal desire become something to suppress rather than acknowledge? He thought of his own quarters, sterile and efficient, decorated only with commendations and tactical displays. He thought of his schedule, every hour accounted for, every moment optimized. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done something simply because he wanted to. I used to paint, the Hierophant's assistant whispered, before my duties increased. Light patterns on crystal, abstract compositions. It served no purpose. I haven't done it in 6 years. That's depressing as hell, said Dr. Rodriguez, but gently. You should paint again. Actually, you know what? Tomorrow, we're setting up an art room. Anyone who wants can come make something useless and beautiful. Deal? The assistant looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The Hierophant would never approve. Did I ask the Hierophant? Rodriguez smiled. I asked you. They finished the movie. When it ended, no one left immediately. They sat in the afterglow of shared experience, talking about favorite scenes, debating character choices, arguing cheerfully about plot holes. The conversation drifted. Someone asked about Earth. The humans showed pictures, told stories about home with voices that carried longing but also joy. They talked about stupid things they'd done as children, mistakes that made them laugh now, moments of ordinary beauty they missed. Vexaris found himself speaking without intending to. There's a nebula near my homeworld, the Crimson Veil. When I was young, before my military training, I would take a shuttle and fly into it, just sit there, surrounded by that red light, feeling insignificant and infinite at the same time. It was against regulations even then. Dangerous, wasteful of resources. I haven't gone back in 43 years. Why not? Asked James, the human who defended his grandmother's cooking with such passion. The question was so simple. The answer should have been obvious. Duty, responsibility, the weight of command. But sitting here, in this warm room full of beings who'd chosen to be together, Vexaris couldn't remember why those reasons had ever seemed sufficient. I don't know, he said, and the admission felt like a door opening. The gathering broke up near midnight, station time. As beings filed out, they moved differently, slower, less rigid. The Kelvarade was still holding her bowl of colored candies, protective. The Keltari scientists were making plans to meet again, independent of any official function. The Hierophant's assistant had tears in his eyes. Vexaris was the last to leave. At the door, Chen stopped him. "Hey, Admiral. Thanks for coming. I know it probably felt weird." "It was highly irregular," Vexaris agreed. Then, surprising himself, "When is the next movie?" Chen's smile could have lit a solar system. "Thursday. We're doing a double feature, and Rodriguez is serious about that art thing tomorrow. You should come. Bring that nebula with you, even if it's just in your head." Walking back to his quarters, Vexaris noticed things he'd stopped seeing years ago. The way the station's lights reflected off the polished floors. The gentle hum of life support, constant and reassuring. A young Ventari maintenance worker humming something while she worked. A sound she immediately stopped when she saw him, shame flickering across her features at being caught in such unprofessional behavior. He almost told her to continue, that it was fine, that the universe didn't need constant silence and efficiency. He didn't, but the impulse itself was revolutionary. His quarters felt especially empty that night. He stood at his window again, looking out at the Empire's magnificent capital, and for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what they'd built. Not pride in its power, but something more complicated. A structure so vast and perfect that it had forgotten to leave room for the beings within it to simply be. His console chimed. Reports waiting. 3 security briefings about the human problem. Recommendations for stricter integration protocols. Concerns about cultural contamination spreading through imperial society. He should address them immediately. Instead, he pulled up his personal files, scrolling back through years of perfectly organized efficiency until he found it. A single image, taken when he was 17 years old. His shuttle, barely visible against the endless red of the crimson veil. He'd kept it all these years, buried under layers of official documents and tactical assessments, a secret even from himself. Tomorrow there would be meetings, decisions to make. The Council was growing concerned, he knew, about humanity's effect on imperial stability. Some were calling for restrictions, for quarantine, for a return to traditional order. They saw the changes spreading through their society and felt only fear. But tonight, looking at that old photograph, Vexaris felt something he couldn't quite name. A crack in the foundation of certainty. A question that once asked could never be unasked. What if we built all of this magnificence, conquered the stars and unified the galaxy, only to imprison ourselves in our own success? What if the humans weren't the threat to the Empire? What if they were showing them what the Empire had cost them all along? Not in power or territory, but in the simple, irreplaceable ability to be genuinely, messily, imperfectly alive? The art room materialized in an unused storage bay within 72 hours. The humans had simply decided it would exist, and through sheer force of casual determination, made it so. They requisitioned supplies through proper channels, but didn't wait for approval before starting. By the time the bureaucratic response came back, a form requesting clarification on the purpose and expected return on resource investment, the space was already functioning. Word spread through unofficial channels, the kind of communication network that existed beneath the Empire's official infrastructure, like roots beneath stone. Beings would pass each other in corridors and mention it quietly, almost guiltily. "Have you heard about the room?" Always phrased as a question, always answered with something between curiosity and fear. The Hierophant's assistant was the first non-human to arrive that morning. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, staring at the tables covered with supplies, physical pigments, light-sensitive crystals, projection equipment, materials from a dozen worlds arranged without hierarchy or purpose beyond creation. Dr. Rodriguez was already there, working on something with clay, her hands covered in the material, completely absorbed. "I don't know how to start," he said quietly. She looked up, smiled. "Nobody does. That's the point. Just pick something that calls to you and see what happens." He chose the light-reactive crystals, his species' traditional medium. For the first hour, his movements were careful, controlled, following patterns drilled into him through years of formal training. The result was technically perfect and utterly soulless. He stared at it with something like despair. "It's supposed to be good," he said. "Why isn't it good?" Marcus, working on a painting nearby, glanced over. "Because you're trying to make it good. Art isn't about good, it's about honest. I don't understand the difference." "Yeah," Marcus said, returning to his canvas where he was painting something that might have been a sunset or might have been an explosion. "Neither did I for a long time." The assistant stood there, trembling slightly, and then did something that would have been unthinkable a week ago. He swept the crystals aside and started over, not thinking about form or technique or what was appropriate, just letting his hands move. The pattern that emerged was chaotic, raw, breaking every aesthetic rule his species held sacred. It looked like rage and grief and hope tangled together. It looked like 6 years of suppressed want finally given form. He stared at it and started crying. Rodriguez came over, didn't touch him. She'd learned enough about his species to know physical comfort wasn't their way, but stood close enough that he knew he wasn't alone. "Yeah," she said softly. "Art does that sometimes." By midday, 17 beings from 8 species had cycled through. Some stayed for hours, lost in creation, others left after minutes, overwhelmed. But they all came back. And slowly the sterile storage bay became something else entirely. The walls began filling with works that ranged from technically impressive to emotionally devastating to wonderfully, terribly sincere. A Kronar officer created a sculpture of weapons melted into something that resembled a flower. A Zenthari scientist wrote poetry in bioluminescent ink that faded as you read it, forcing you to experience each word in the moment before it disappeared forever. The Kelvar aide, who had never created anything in her life, sat for 3 hours arranging colored stones into patterns that somehow captured the essence of loneliness. The Empire noticed. How could it not? Productivity metrics were shifting, not decreasing. In many cases they were actually improving, but the pattern was changing. Beings were taking breaks, actual breaks, not meditation cycles or efficiency optimization periods. They were talking to each other about things unrelated to work. Laughter was being reported from previously silent workstations. The change was spreading like a slow-motion shockwave through the rigid structure of imperial society. The council convened in emergency session. This time, the atmosphere wasn't confused curiosity but something sharper. Vexaris sat in his assigned position and felt the weight of judgment from every direction. He'd been seen at the movie night. His attendance at the art room had been documented. Others who'd participated were receiving similar scrutiny. High Chancellor Mordeth, a being whose species had founded the Empire a millennium ago, addressed the assembly with a voice that resonated like ancient stone grinding. "We face a crisis, not of weapons or territory, but something more insidious. The humans are dismantling everything we've built. Not through force, but through negligence. Through their complete disregard for order, they're teaching others to do the same. Integration officers report that beings are questioning protocols, requesting time for personal pursuits. Some have even suggested that efficiency isn't the highest virtue." A murmur ran through the council. Shock, agreement, fear, mixing in equal parts. "The humans must be contained," Mordeth continued. "Restricted to designated areas, limited contact with Imperial citizens. We cannot allow this chaos to continue." Vexaris found himself standing before he'd consciously decided to do so. Every eye turned toward him. He'd spent 40 years building his reputation as the Empire's most disciplined military mind. What he said next would either be remembered as wisdom or career-ending heresy. "What exactly are we containing?" His voice was steady, but his heart hammered against his chest. "What crisis are we preventing?" Beings are still performing their duties, in many cases performing them better. The only thing that's changed is that they're also living beyond protocol, beyond structure. Mordeth's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. Do you not see the danger? If everyone pursues personal desire over collective need, civilization collapses. We learned this lesson at the Empire's founding. It's written in our most sacred texts. Order prevents chaos. Structure enables prosperity. Individual want must be subordinate to collective function. And what have we prospered into? The question came from Dr. Yiltara, who had been silent until now. She stood slowly, her 4 eyes blazing. A society where beings live in magnificent towers and magnificent emptiness, where we've achieved everything except a reason to care that we've achieved it. I've spent the last week analyzing human psychology, trying to find the flaw in their thinking. And I've realized they don't have a flaw. We do. The council chamber erupted, voices overlapping, some in outrage, some in desperate agreement. Chancellor Mordeth raised his appendages for silence, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something more dangerous than anger, something like fear. You would destroy 1,000 years of stability for what? Paintings, movies, the fleeting pleasure of beings who don't know what they're asking for. I would remember, Yiltara said, that we're alive, not just functioning. Alive. The vote was called. Immediate restrictions on human contact, containment protocols, a return to traditional integration methods. The council's decision would be final and immediate. Vexaris watched the votes registering on the holographic display, a sea of affirmations washing away the brief, strange moment of possibility. The humans would be isolated. The contamination would be stopped. Order would be restored. But something else was happening outside the council chambers. Something the vote counters didn't see because they were focused on the display. In corridors throughout the capital, beings were gathering. Not in protest. The Empire had protocols for protests, ways to contain and redirect them. This was different. They were simply standing together, these beings from different worlds and different castes, united by something the Empire had no protocol for, a shared moment of choosing. The Hierophant's assistant had left his post to join them. The Zenthari engineer stood beside humans she'd watched movies with. The Kronar officers who'd discovered they enjoyed painting positioned themselves throughout the crowd, not as guards, but as participants. They weren't holding weapons or signs. They weren't making demands. They were just present, embodying a quiet refusal to go back to the emptiness they'd escaped. In the art room, which someone had declared would remain open regardless of the council's decision, more beings continued to arrive. Some came to create, some just to witness creation, some simply because they'd heard about a place where wanting something for yourself wasn't treated as weakness. A young Keltari had written something on the wall in luminous paint. 3 words in universal standard. I was here. Others had added their own marks. Names, symbols, statements of existence. The wall was becoming a monument to presence, to the radical act of being seen as individuals rather than components of a greater machine. Vexaris received the notification as the council session ended. The vote had passed. Containment would begin immediately. But attached to the official decree was an urgent message from his second-in-command, security footage showing the gatherings throughout the station. Not riots, not rebellion, just beings standing together, waiting. What are they waiting for? The message asked. Vexaris knew. They were waiting to see if the Empire would choose force or wisdom. Waiting to see if a civilization that had conquered the galaxy could admit it had lost something essential along the way. Waiting to see if the system that had given them security and purpose would also allow them the dangerous, necessary freedom to be more than their functions. He thought of the Crimson Veil, that nebula he hadn't visited in 43 years. Tomorrow the containment would begin. Tomorrow the Empire would reassert its control and everything would return to its proper order. Tomorrow, the brief, strange rebellion of beings who just wanted to feel something would be catalogued as a historical anomaly and filed away. Tonight, though, there was still a choice. Vexaris opened his personal console and began composing a message, not to his command staff or the council, but to every being he'd seen at movie night, every face in the art room, every name on that luminous wall. The message was simple, probably insufficient, possibly the end of his career, but it was honest, and he was learning that honesty mattered more than safety. The Crimson Veil is 17 hours away by fast shuttle. I haven't seen it in 43 years. I'm leaving in 1 hour. Anyone who wants to come is welcome. Bring whatever you need to paint it, photograph it, write about it, or just sit in it, and remember that you're allowed to exist for no purpose except to witness beauty. I don't know if we'll have another chance after tonight. He sent it before he could reconsider. Then he sat in his quarters, in the silence he'd once found comforting and now found suffocating, and waited to see if anyone would answer. Waited to discover if he was alone in this moment of choosing, or if something had fundamentally shifted in the Empire's foundations. Outside his window, the capital gleamed with eternal, perfect light, monuments to achievement stretching toward stars they'd conquered but forgotten to appreciate. His console began to ping, one response, then another, then another. The numbers climbing steadily as beings across the station made their choices, sent their quiet declarations of want over duty, of existence over mere function. By the time the hour was up, Vexaris was staring at 247 confirmed attendees, with more messages still arriving. The Empire had voted for containment, but the beings within it, it seemed, were voting for something else entirely. The shuttles launched in near silence. 27 vessels requisitioned through channels that would probably trigger investigations by morning. But by morning, the Empire would be different, or it wouldn't, and either way, the investigations would be beside the point. Vexaris piloted the lead craft, his hands steady on controls he'd trained with for decades, though never for a purpose like this. Behind him sat beings he'd served alongside, commanded, fought with, beings who'd been names on duty rosters and faces in briefing rooms. Now they were something else. Conspirators, pilgrims, refugees from efficiency. The human shuttle flew alongside his, and through the view screen he could see Ambassador Chen at the controls, casual as ever, probably still wearing those ridiculous sweatpants. The juxtaposition should have been absurd. A ragtag fleet of stolen Imperial vessels following a human in comfortable clothing toward a nebula for no strategic purpose. Yet every ship was there by choice. Every being aboard had calculated the cost and come anyway. The communications channel crackled, Dr. Rodriguez's voice. "Hey, Admiral, you doing okay?" Such a simple question. Such an impossible question. Was he okay? He was committing career suicide. He was violating direct council orders not yet officially issued, but implied with absolute clarity. He was leading hundreds of Imperial citizens on what would undoubtedly be classified as desertion. And yet, "I'm going to see something beautiful," he said. "For the first time in 4 decades, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. So yes, I think I'm okay." Silence on the channel. Then, quietly from multiple ships, voices began responding. "I'm okay too. Me too. I forgot what this felt like. I never knew it could feel like this." A chorus of small rebellions, each one an admission that something had been missing, that the Empire's magnificent order had come at a cost they were only now beginning to calculate. The jump to hyperspace felt different this time. Vexaris had made 10,000 such jumps, each one a calculation of vectors and energy expenditure and tactical positioning. This one was none of those things. This one was simply movement toward beauty, toward the memory of a younger self who hadn't yet learned to suppress want in service of function. The stars stretched and bent around them, and for once he didn't analyze the physics. He just watched. They emerged at the nebula's edge 17 hours later. The crimson veil spread before them like someone had set the universe on fire and frozen it mid-burn. Vast clouds of ionized gas glowing red and gold and deep purple at the edges shot through with young stars being born in real time, their light painting new colors across the cosmic canvas. It was exactly as he remembered. It was nothing like he remembered, because he was different now, seeing it with eyes that had forgotten how to see anything except through tactical assessment and threat analysis. "Oh," someone whispered over the open channel. Just that. Oh, like they'd run out of words, like language was insufficient for the moment. The shuttles spread out, each finding their own position within the nebula's embrace. Some stayed close together, beings who wanted to experience this collectively. Others drifted toward solitude. There was no protocol for this, no assigned formations. Just beings making choices about how they wanted to exist in this moment. Vex Aris brought his shuttle deep into the thickest part of the cloud. The red light surrounded him, filled the cabin, turned everything the color of blood and roses and distant suns, dying beautiful deaths. He powered down everything except life support and sat in the silence, feeling the universe continue its ancient work all around him, indifferent to empires and councils and the small, fierce rebellion of beings who just wanted to remember they were alive. He didn't know how long he sat there. Time felt different here, unmoored from duty cycles and efficiency metrics. But eventually, movement caught his eye. Other shuttles drifting closer. Through the red haze he could make them out, scattered throughout the nebula like seeds in cosmic soil. And from several of them, he saw lights. Beams painting the gas clouds, creating temporary art installations on a canvas millions of kilometers across. Someone was projecting images, photographs from their homeworld, sharing their beauty with the universe. Another had brought music, broadcasting it across the fleet channel. Simple melodies that somehow made the nebula feel more alive. In a shuttle nearby, he could see the Hierophant's assistant, his crystalline form refracting the red light into 1,000 colors, his hands moving over light-reactive crystals, creating patterns that danced across his viewport. Not perfect patterns, not technically correct compositions, just honest expressions of what this moment meant, translated into his species' medium. The art room hadn't ended. It had simply expanded to include the universe, control to all vessels. The transmission cut through the shared silence like a blade. Official channel, Imperial command frequency. You are ordered to return immediately. Council has issued containment protocols. Your current location is tracked. Continued non-compliance will result in disciplinary action up to and including court-martial. No one moved. 27 shuttles floating in red light, 247 beings holding their breath, waiting to see what happened when you simply said no to 1,000 years of absolute authority. Vex Aris reached for his communications panel. He should acknowledge. He should comply. He should lead these beings back to safety and order and the slow suffocation of lives lived in service to something that had forgotten to serve them back. Instead, he switched to the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Vex Aris. I am in the Crimson Veil. I am not in distress. I am not lost. I am exactly where I choose to be for the first time in 43 years. And I'm not leaving until I've had enough time to remember why I wanted to be here in the first place. Another voice joined in, the Kronar officer who'd admitted to collecting music. This is Commander Thelrix. I'm looking at something beautiful and thinking about nothing except how it makes me feel. It's terrifying. It's wonderful. I'm not ready to stop. Then another. The Zenthari engineer. Dr. Milvara, I'm writing poetry about the colors. It's terrible poetry. I don't care. I'm writing it anyway. One by one, they declared themselves. Not in defiance. That wasn't quite right. In presence. In the radical act of being somewhere for themselves rather than for the Empire. The transmissions overlapped. Voices from different worlds and different philosophies united in the simple, revolutionary acknowledgement that they wanted something beyond their assigned functions. From the human shuttle, Ambassador Chen finally spoke. "You know what this is? This right here? This is the point. Not survival, not efficiency, not conquest or order or any of that. This. Beings choosing to exist in a moment because it means something to them. That's what we kept trying to tell you. That's what you thought was chaos. It's not chaos. It's life." The Imperial Command Channel went silent. Vexaris imagined the scene at Central Control, officers staring at their screens, trying to understand what protocol applied when an admiral and 200 Imperial citizens simply refused to be anything except present. There was no military procedure for this, no diplomatic framework. How do you threaten beings who've already chosen something more important than safety? Hours passed. The red light shifted as the nebula slowly rotated, revealing new depths, new structures within the cosmic architecture. Beings ventured out in spacesuits, wanting to be even closer, wanting to feel the nebula around them with nothing between. Dr. Rodriguez organized what she called a space painting session. Multiple beings using light projectors to create collaborative artworks on the gas clouds. Images that would exist for minutes before the nebula's movement erased them. The impermanence was the point. The fleeting nature of beauty made it more precious, not less. Vexaris found himself floating outside his shuttle, tethered but distant, surrounded by red light that made him feel newborn. Nearby, a young Keltari whose name he didn't know floated in silence, just existing. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were sharing something wordless, this moment of choosing presence over purpose, beauty over utility, want over should. The transmission came on a private channel this time. High Chancellor Mordeth, his voice stripped of its formal authority, sounding ancient and tired. "Admiral, what are you doing?" "Remembering," Vexaris said simply. "We built something magnificent, Chancellor, but we forgot to live in it. We forgot that the point of civilization isn't to create perfect order. It's to create space for imperfect beings to find meaning. If everyone does what they want, the Empire collapses." "No," Vexaris said, looking at the shuttles around him, at the beings creating and sharing, and simply being together in this impossible moment. If everyone only does what they're told, the Empire was already empty. We just didn't notice until someone showed us what we were missing. Silence. Long enough that Vexaris thought the connection had been severed. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "I haven't seen the crystal gardens of my homeworld in 60 years. I was scheduled to visit 3 times, always cancelled for matters of state. Always tomorrow. Tomorrow doesn't exist, Chancellor, only todays. Consecutive todays that we can spend functioning or spend living." More silence. Then, impossibly, unthinkably, "The Council will convene again in 48 hours. I suggest you and your fleet return by then, not under arrest. As invited speakers, the humans have been remarkably poor at explaining themselves. Perhaps you and these others can do better." The transmission ended. Vexaris floated in red light and felt something like hope, fragile and strange. The Empire hadn't fallen, but it had blinked. That 1,000-year certainty had developed a crack. Around him, the fleet was celebrating in their various ways. Quiet joy, careful optimism, the sense that perhaps something had shifted. But they didn't leave immediately. They stayed. They'd come for this beauty, and they would take their time with it. The Empire could wait. Everything could wait. Right now, in this moment, they were going to be fully, completely, inefficiently present. Dr. Rodriguez's shuttle drifted close to his. Through the viewport, he could see her, painting something on a small canvas, trying to capture the red light, knowing she'd fail and doing it anyway. She looked up, caught his eye, gave him a thumbs up. Such a simple gesture. Such a human gesture. An acknowledgement that they'd done something right, that this moment mattered, that the universe was better for their presence in it. Vexaris returned the gesture, clumsy in his spacesuit but sincere. Then he turned back to the nebula, letting the red light wash over him, feeling 43 years of careful distance begin to dissolve. He didn't know what would happen when they returned. Didn't know if the council would truly listen, or if this was just a delay before inevitable consequences. But right now, that didn't matter. Right now, he was exactly where he wanted to be, feeling exactly what he wanted to feel, existing not as a function or a rank, but as a being who'd remembered, finally, how to simply be. They returned to the capital 41 hours later, not as fugitives, but as something the Empire had no classification for. The docking procedures were the same, the protocols unchanged, but the beings who moved through them had been fundamentally altered. You could see it in the way they walked, a certain slowness, a presence that hadn't existed before. They weren't rushing toward the next duty cycle. They were inhabiting their moments. The council chamber had been reconfigured. Not the grand ceremonial space with its symbolic architecture meant to overwhelm, but a smaller venue, circular, where everyone could see everyone else without hierarchy, dictating the sightlines. When Vexaris entered with the others who'd chosen the nebula over orders, he found the council members already seated, but they looked different too. Smaller somehow. More uncertain. High Chancellor Mordeth sat without his formal regalia, and the absence was startling, like seeing a monument without its facade. "We have called you here," Mordeth began, then stopped. Started again. "I have called you here because I don't understand what happened, and a leader who doesn't understand is simply someone with power they shouldn't have." He looked directly at Ambassador Chen, who sat with the same casual posture he brought to everything, completely unbothered by the weight of history pressing down on this moment. "You came to our empire. We expected you to be impressed, to be grateful for inclusion in something greater than yourselves. Instead, you seemed bored. Why?" Chen leaned back, considering. "We weren't bored by you. We were bored by the performance. You kept showing us your resume when we wanted to meet the person. We are the Empire, the structure, the achievement, the order. That is what we are." "No," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "That's what you built. It's not what you are. You're the beings who built it. And somewhere along the way you forgot that the building was supposed to serve you, not the other way around." A Zenthari council member spoke up, her voice sharp with genuine confusion. "But if everyone pursues personal desire, if structure dissolves into individual want, how does anything function? How do ships get maintained, food get produced, systems stay operational? Your way leads to chaos." "Does it?" The Kronar officer who'd discovered painting stood, addressing the council with the confidence of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences. "I've been collecting music for 15 years. Secret. Shameful. Every moment I spent with it felt stolen from duty. But last month, I started sharing it, playing it during maintenance shifts. You know what happened? My crew's error rate dropped by 30%. They work better because they remember why they're working. Not for the abstract concept of the Empire, but because they're part of something that allows them to be whole." Dr. Yiltara rose next, her 4 eyes bright. "I've been analyzing the data. Every department that's had contact with human contamination shows the same pattern. Productivity remains stable or increases, sick days decrease, transfer requests drop. Conflict resolution becomes easier. But the metrics we don't usually track, the ones we can barely quantify, those explode. Voluntary collaboration, creative problem solving, beings staying late not because they have to, but because they want to finish something they care about. We thought we were measuring efficiency, but we were measuring compliance. Those aren't the same thing. Then what are you proposing?" Mordeth's question carried the weight of a civilization teetering on a decision point. That we abandon structure entirely, that we dissolve into feel-good chaos and hope the infrastructure maintains itself? No, Vexaris said, standing now, feeling every eye turn toward him. We're proposing that we remember the purpose of structure. It's not an end unto itself. It's a framework that should allow beings to flourish, not a cage that prevents them from living. The humans didn't bring chaos. They brought a question we'd stopped asking. What's the point of all this magnificence if no one gets to enjoy it? He gestured to the beings around him, the strange coalition of species and ranks who'd chosen beauty over orders. Every being here still does their duty, but they also paint, or write, or watch movies, or float in nebulas for no purpose except to witness wonder. And they're better at their duties because of it. Not despite the so-called distractions, but because of them. Because they remember why any of it matters. Marcus stood, adding his voice to the growing chorus. Look, we're not special. We're not enlightened or evolved or whatever. We just never forgot that life is supposed to feel like something. You built this incredible empire, but you built it at the cost of your own humanity, or whatever the equivalent is for each of your species. You optimized yourselves right out of existence. And the solution is art rooms and movie nights? Another council member, disbelief thick in their voice. The solution, Chen said, is remembering that you're allowed to want things. That being efficient isn't the same as being alive. That a perfect system inhabited by hollow beings is just an elaborate monument to loneliness. He paused, then continued more gently. You asked why we seemed bored when we arrived. It's because we've seen what you've built before. Not this exactly, but the pattern. Societies that get so focused on achievement that they forget achievement is supposed to serve life, not replace it. And every time it's the same. They build higher and reach farther and optimize harder, and everyone inside slowly hollows out until they're just functions in a magnificent machine. Silence filled the chamber. The kind of silence that happens when truth lands in a space that's been avoiding it for far too long. Vexaris watched the council members, saw the recognition dawning across alien features, the painful acknowledgement that they'd built something extraordinary and lost themselves in the process. So what now? Mordeth asked, and his voice carried none of the authority of a high chancellor, just the honest confusion of a being confronting an uncomfortable truth. Now, Dr. Rodriguez said, you choose. Keep going as you are, keep optimizing and structuring and efficiently marching toward a future where everything works perfectly and nothing matters. Or you could try something terrifying and wonderful. You could let your people be people. You could build spaces into your perfect order for imperfection, for waste, for the glorious inefficiency of beings who paint and laugh and float in nebulas for no reason except that it makes them feel alive. The council cannot mandate joy, someone objected. No, Yeltara agreed, but you can stop mandating its absence. You can stop treating personal desire as a threat to order. You can acknowledge that a civilization is only as meaningful as the lives lived within it. The debate continued for hours, not the formal, ritualized discussions the council usually conducted, but messy, emotional, real conversation between beings grappling with questions they'd long since stopped asking. Some council members resisted, clinging to the certainty of order over the uncertainty of adaptation. Others seemed almost desperate to change, as if Chen's words had unlocked something they'd been suppressing for decades. By the time they adjourned, nothing was resolved completely, but something had shifted. The vote, when it came, wasn't about containment or restriction. It was about experiment. 6 months. 6 months of what they called adaptive integration. Art rooms would remain open, social gatherings would be permitted, beings would be allowed to pursue personal interests alongside their duties, with the understanding that this was an unprecedented deviation from traditional protocols. It wasn't a revolution. It was barely a beginning, but it was a crack in the foundation wide enough to let light in. That night, the art room was packed. Beings from every level of imperial society, some coming to create, others just to witness. All of them participating in the quiet rebellion of choosing to be present. The Hierophant's assistant had his light crystal installation on display, and beings stood before it in silence, seeing their own suppressed wants reflected in his honest expression of pain and hope. The Kronar officer played music while others worked, melodies from a dozen worlds mixing in harmonies that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Vexaris stood at the edge of it all watching and felt Ambassador Chen appear beside him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Chen spoke. "You know this isn't fixed, right? Some beings will choose to stay exactly as they were. Some parts of the Empire will resist any change. This could fail." "I know," Vexaris said. "But at least we're asking the question now. At least we're acknowledging that there should be more to existence than efficient functioning. What will you do after the 6 months when the Council evaluates whether this experiment worked?" Vexaris smiled, the expression still feeling new on his face. "I'm going to keep going back to the Crimson Veil, maybe once a month. Maybe I'll bring different beings each time. Show them that it's okay to want something beautiful for no reason, except that it's beautiful. And I'll keep doing my duty, commanding fleets, maintaining order. But I'll do it as a being who also paints and watches movies and floats in nebulas. I'll be both. That's what you taught us, isn't it? That we don't have to choose between structure and life. We just have to remember that structure should serve life, not consume it." Chen nodded. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be okay, all of you. It'll be messy and uncomfortable, and some beings will absolutely hate it. But you're asking the right questions now, and that's how everything important starts." They watched as the Hierophant's assistant taught a young Ventari how to work with light crystals, the two of them creating something imperfect and sincere together. Watched as the Zenthari engineer read her terrible poetry to a small audience who appreciated it not for its technical merit, but for its honest attempt at capturing feeling in words. Watched as beings from rival worlds collaborated on a painting, arguing cheerfully about color choices, their ancient enmities forgotten in the shared act of creation. "You know what the strangest part is?" Vexaris said quietly. "We thought you were the threat. We thought your chaos would destroy us. But it wasn't chaos at all. It was just life, lived honestly. And it wasn't destruction you brought. It was remembering." "Remembering what?" "That we're allowed to be more than our functions. That being alive means feeling things, wanting things, choosing things for no reason except that they matter to us. You didn't teach us anything we didn't already know. You just reminded us of what we'd forgotten." The human smiled. "That's all anyone can really do for each other, isn't it? Remind each other that we're here, that it counts, that the moments we choose matter more than the systems we're born into." Outside the art room, the Empire continued its eternal work. Ships moved between stars. Systems maintained themselves. The grand machinery of civilization kept turning. But inside, in small spaces throughout the capital and spreading slowly to other worlds, beings were learning to inhabit their lives differently. Not abandoning duty, but adding meaning to it. Not rejecting structure, but refusing to let structure define the entirety of their existence. And in the quiet hours of station night, Vexaris sat in his quarters, no longer sterile, now decorated with paintings from the art room and a small collection of items that served no purpose except that they meant something to him, and looked at the old photograph of himself in the Crimson Veil. Tomorrow there would be meetings and decisions and the complex work of maintaining an empire in transition. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply exist in this moment, feeling grateful for the boredom that had turned out to be wisdom, for the chaos that was really just life, for the humans who'd looked at 1,000 years of magnificent achievement and asked the most dangerous question of all. But are you happy? The answer, he was learning, was something each being had to discover for themselves. But at least now they were allowed to ask. At least now they could search for meaning alongside structure, purpose alongside duty, life alongside function. The empire hadn't fallen. It had just remembered finally that empires are built by beings, for beings, and that any system that forgets this fundamental truth is simply a beautiful machine running empty. In the art room, someone had added new words to the wall beside "I was here." They glowed softly in the darkness, a declaration and a question and a hope all mixed together. We are still becoming. And maybe, Vexaris thought, that was the real answer. Not a final destination, not a perfect balance achieved and frozen forever, but an ongoing process of remembering and forgetting and remembering again that they were alive, imperfect, valuable not despite their inefficiencies but because of them. That the point wasn't to optimize existence out of living, but to build systems that allowed beings to be fully, messily, gloriously themselves. The humans hadn't conquered the empire. They'd just reminded it what it had conquered itself to achieve, and asked, quietly, persistently, with movie nights and art rooms and casual disregard for unnecessary grandeur, was it worth it? And in asking, they'd given the empire something more valuable than order or efficiency or the certainty of ancient protocols. They'd given it back the possibility of meaning, the dangerous, necessary freedom to choose presence over perfection, the radical act of being alive.